Hey everyone, it's David Ault, and I wanted to offer a lesson around a question. And the question is, what do you identify as? What do you identify as? In other words, what are the stories that you and I tell about ourselves that perhaps have gone unexamined or unchallenged lately? Because it is those stories that influence the way in which we navigate and integrate into the world out there. It's those stories that influence the way in which the world is responding back to us. And so it's always crucial that you and I stop and ask that question. What are we identifying as? It reminded me of a great story written by an author named Anthony DeMello. And he told about a lion that was captured and put into a lion's concentration camp. And when he was there, to his amazement, he saw so many lions in this situation. There were even lions that had lived their whole lives in this camp because they were born there. He saw all of these subgroups. There were groups centered around socialization and community and organization and activity. There were cultural groups that focused on preserving the heritage and the stories about the time when the lion roamed free in the jungle. There were religious groups that got together and sang inspirational songs and told stories about a time in the future when the lion would be rescued and able to roam free again. There were revolutionary groups that got together and strategized about how they would fight against the system, and they would attack the guards only to have those guards replaced by a whole new set of guards. And in all of this activity, there was one single lion that wasn't participating in any group. And he just noticed that the lion was fixed in his gaze, and he would pace back and forth. And he became so fascinated by the one lion that he asked some of the other people in the subgroups about him. And they said, oh, he's weird, or they admired him, but they thought he was eccentric. And finally, he got up the courage to go to the lion himself and to say, I've noticed you. I noticed that you're not participating. Why is that? And that lion said, join no group. And the newly captive lion said, why? And he said, because it distracts. And he said, so what is it that you are aiming or searching or looking towards? And that lion said, the fence. I'm studying the nature of the fence. So in the story, the fence is this thing that is separating him from captivity and freedom. The fence is the barricade that is keeping us from experiencing this thing known as infinite possibility, because we are so involved in a lot of groups that unknowingly have accepted finite realities. Did you follow that? The word infinite is incredible. It's a word that has fascinated me for so long. And I meditated on it. I've laughed at the irony of the way in which we try to define it. Because how do you define something that is infinite? None of us have fully experienced that, nor will we ever. And yet here we are trying to put definition to it. But you see, the solo lion in the story was focused on and aimed at the nature of the infinite, of freedom. And too often we forget about that, and we identify with subgroups or categories that have made peace with our finite nature, that have made peace with our illness, that have made peace with our woundedness, that have made peace with our victimization. And sometimes we grew up in that, and that's all that we've ever known. And when we don't question that identity, if we don't focus on the nature of the fence and look beyond that and keep our aim and our vision towards that, then we live a life identifying with something that is subpar, with something that is finite. And so think about this word infinite, because we use it a lot. We talk about infinite intelligence. We talk about infinite possibility. But even though we talk about it, we join groups that talk about measured possibility or sensible possibility, not about infinite possibility. We end up talking about diagnoses and labels about our experiences and introduce ourselves and navigate in the world with these identities that are in no way relatable to the infinite nature of who and what we are. As I was thinking about this, the phrase, "a world without end," came into my mind a while back. And I was like, who said that? Where did that phrase come from? A world without end. And I Googled it and noticed that it was attributed to the Apostle Paul in Scripture. And what's fascinating about the deeper dive was that when Paul was writing this in the book of Ephesians, so he was writing these letters to the people of Ephesus. As he was writing these letters, he was in prison. He was in prison awaiting execution, awaiting to be beheaded. And he knew that was his human fate. And yet at the same time that he was in that physical circumstance, he's writing about a world without end. And I'm like, how does one do that? How does one keep their focus or their aim beyond what will happen in the physical plane to something that is a greater reality? And I thought, perhaps it's because Paul didn't identify himself as a prisoner. He identified himself not as a meat suit, not as some physical form, but as a soul that had an eternal expression, a world without end. And so as he's writing the people of Ephesus, he's encouraging them to not get too tied down or too focused on all of the things in the external world, but to remember who they are as a soul. And this is so vital and so important to the well-being of who we are and why we are here. I can imagine that if your year, 2019, was anything like mine, that it was challenging. And in all transparency, it was one of the more difficult years personally for me to navigate. There were some very dark periods. There was some depression. There were a lot of times when I felt like I lost the battle to what the fence represented, to the freedom that was there, because I began to lose myself in an identity of less than. I began to lose myself in an identity of damaged. I began to lose myself in the identity of being a victim. I began to lose myself in the identity of not having enough and worrying about where my source was going to come from. And yet, it was in being with it, not trying to bury my head in the sand, but actually turning to it, that I found the truth. I was reunited with my infinite nature. I was reunited with possibility. And I tell you that because sometimes in certain schools of thought, we will misconstrue the message and we will think that it's bad or it's not spiritual or it's not appropriate to be able to turn to the darkness. But turning to the darkness is critical. Turning to that which feels oppressive is critical in order for us to be reunited with its polarization, which is freedom. To study the fence, to study what's going on, and at the same time accept within ourselves that a solution is still there. As I explore more in the realm of shamanism, one of the key things in that path is to show me what I have become. Ooh, that's a tough one. Show me what I have become. In other words, show me what I have identified as. Show me how my ego is out of control. Show me how my projections and my wounding have led me to behave in ways that were not optimum and not kind. Show me in the ways in which I have hurt another. Show me all of those things. Because it is in turning to those things that I can begin to allow myself to forgive and to free myself. To look at the fence. Not to join subgroups that say, don't look at that, or to distract me, or to pacify the pain, but to turn and to look at the pain so that I can remember that there is something beyond it. I'm hoping that that makes sense, that in this idea of examining what we're identifying as, we get to stop and we get to look at, how did I get here? It isn't about lingering there. It isn't about putting a period at that and saying, well, this is who I am. It's about looking at it and then creating a comma and being able to move forward into what the next representation of our infinite nature is. And so show us who we have become. Show us how we have accepted identities about ourselves that are not true. Show us how we have participated in cultural subgroups that have kept us marginalized. Show us how we have become comfortable in the identity of our victimization, of blaming external things outside of us, even politicians, even government, even teachers, even organizations, that we are constantly using our energy rather than focusing on what is our freedom and what are we here to do. And so, what are we identifying as? What I want you to take away from this is that you and I are groomed, we're built, we are wired to identify with that which is the infinite. How you play with that and explore it, how I play with that and explore it, is entirely up to us. But it is ours to explore. It is ours to embrace. It is ours to ruffle the feathers and to disrupt what was, so that we can continue to study the nature of the fence and to move beyond it into realms of freedom and infinite possibility. Thanks so much. God bless.